Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this first live stream from Keep Whangaparaoa's Green Spaces. I'm Howard, and I'm here with Chris and Owen from the executive team. It's great to be with you tonight. We've had a very tumultuous week here on the Whangaparaoa Peninsula, culminating with 2 disastrous fires and the total loss of the Gulf Harbour Country Club clubhouse. Emotions are obviously running high. There have been lots of personal messages, lots of discussion on our Facebook page. I've received numerous emails and personal messages as well from people who've been traumatised by what's happened. All of this, even though it is a disaster, it doesn't change our resolve around what the purpose is as far as our organisation is concerned, and that purpose is to retain the green space. Nothing changes as far as we're concerned, and tonight Owen and then Chris will talk us through some of the issues that are in front of us at the moment. We will do our best to answer questions as they come in live. We already have 3 or 4 that we're going to address. And hopefully you will go away at the end of this feeling better informed about where we are in our fight to retain the green space. Just before I turn over to Owen, I would just like to tell you that we are going to have a full face-to-face public meeting for everybody later on. It won't be this month, but it will be later on, and we will have full details of all of that. We're just at this stage negotiating around a venue and all of those sorts of organisational things that you have to do to put a public meeting in place. You will be kept informed. So thank you very much for tuning in, and now I will hand over to Owen.
Yeah, thanks, Howard. Yeah, look, the recent fire has certainly been a tragic event, but in a way, it's working in our favour, I suspect, because what has happened is it's galvanised a lot of support and a lot of attention, and we'll go into some of that in a bit more detail as we get into this live stream. And suffice to say, we're not letting some of these issues that are going on take our attention away from the key focus. Our primary objective is to ensure that Long River, Greg Oliver's company, does not gain the necessary approvals to sell the land for housing. We're focusing on the encumbrance, and Chris will talk a bit about that. We want the council to declare its support for the community in that encumbrance. We're focusing on the resource consenting processes, and that's both with council, and we'll talk a little bit about what has happened with the resource consent application that went in November last year. We're focusing on his financial backers and continuing to put pressure in that area. We have tremendous support from you folk in the community, and recently we have established some very key support in the business community in the Auckland area, and that is really important to our cause, to have some key business developers on our side. I talked about the resource consent. The council is the traditional route for that, but we're also aware that the fast track approval legislation is going through Parliament at the moment. It's at select committee stage, and we we would like the government to declare who has applied under that proposed legislation. Applications closed several weeks ago. We are making an assumption that Long River Oliver will have applied to use the fast track approval legislation, and we're sending strong message to government that building houses on the golf course land, which is covenanted for 999 years as green space, does not meet the criteria of national or regional significance in terms of a project. So we're remaining focused on our end goal, and we'll now hand over to back to you, Howard, with start addressing some of the questions that have come in.
Okay, so one of the questions that came in was, could we establish another petition and petition Parliament around the green space and protecting the green space? Now, as you know, we've already had a public petition which raised about 4,600 signatures, and we presented that public petition to Auckland Council, to their planning committee. We first did an introduction to the local board and spoke to them about the petition, and then took it to Auckland Council. Now, that petition was well received, and it has been noted, and there is no reason why, if again there was an overwhelming feeling from the community that another petition would be useful, that we could get another one up and going. That's not a problem. I think, though, that we would probably need a particular focus for that petition. The first one was about protecting the green space. A future one might be to take development of the green space out of the fast track approvals, for example. So that's something that we're going to think about. We'll keep all of that in mind, and then we'll be able to report back to you, and we'll see how all of that goes. Now, Chris, could I hand over to you to talk about some of the issues that you're going to cover?
Right, thank you. So one of the questions that we got was, what is exactly the structure that Oliver is using? So I thought I would run through that first so that everybody understands what the business structure is. Now, the structure is not atypical of property developers. They put in complex structures to try and minimise their own liability, and so this is very much along those lines. So let's start with Oliver himself. He is the sole shareholder of a company that I'll call Phoenix Trust Limited. Now, I've used the word Phoenix because that's what everybody says. In fact, the E and the O are round the other way. So the correct pronunciation is actually the Phoenix Trust Limited. But I've seen spellings both ways. But Phoenix is the name of that company. Now, that company, in turn, holds the shares 100% in 3 other companies. Those companies are Long River, GHCC 2016, and GHCC Equipment. Each of those is owned by Phoenix Trust Limited. Now, the purpose of those companies is firstly Long River, and Long River is the most critical one. Long River is the owner of the land. So all the land associated with the golf course and the ancillary land is owned by Long River. Long River have mortgages. They have 3 mortgages. The first mortgage to an American private equity company called 1543 Investments. The second mortgage to a finance company, and a third mortgage to another finance company, which may well be a related party to Oliver. The total amount owing on those mortgages, we understand to be $48 million. We understand that Oliver paid something in the vicinity of 24 million. So it's pretty much close to double. And the reason for that is that with development finance, the interest that is occurring, and it will be a relatively high rate of interest, is what we call back-ended. And what that means is that the interest builds, but is not paid during the currency of the loan. So the longer the loan goes on, the more interest is being accrued. And so the capital debt ultimately has now got to 48 million. And the longer it goes on, the greater it will be. Now, the issue around that, of course, is that the golf course is not worth 48 million. Now, let me turn to the encumbrance. The encumbrance is effectively a contract between the landowner, whoever that is at any given point in time, and in this case, the Auckland City Council, who inherited it from the Rodney District Council. That encumbrance provides that the golf course land can only be used for 999 years as a golf course and country club. Now, the question then is, how is it possible for somebody to vary or remove that encumbrance? And there's two ways that it can be done. Well, there's actually three ways. That it can be done in conjunction with the council, who is a party to the contract. It can agree with the developer to vary or remove the encumbrance. We don't believe that's going to happen. The council have been very supportive of the encumbrance, and we do not think that's a potential. The second way is the encumbrance is worded in an interesting way. And what it says is that if there is some activity which includes a resource consent and which would apply to the current resource consent with respect to the boundary changes, then that is deemed to have removed or varied the encumbrance. And that's why we have been fighting tooth and nail to make sure that the resource consent is notified. And it has been notified. The commissioner who looked at it said this is definitely something that needs to be notified. So our whole argument with the council is that the encumbrance is in danger if the resource consent were granted. And so we are well aware of the implications of that, and we're going to ensure that everybody else is aware of the implications of that as well. Our legal advice is that the prospect of somebody succeeding to have the encumbrance removed by virtue of a resource consent application is unlikely, because the resource consent application should not be granted. And that is certainly going to be our position. The third way is that a person who is what is called the encumbrancy, in this case Greg Oliver's company, could apply to the High Court to have it removed. And that's a unilateral application. But again, the case law that we have gone through, the wording of the Resource Management Act, we think the chances of the High Court ever agreeing unilaterally to remove the encumbrance is extremely unlikely. So we think we've got most of our bases covered, but it's essential that we continue to monitor that encumbrance and to try and ensure that the council actively comes out and supports it. Now I'm going to turn to the liquidation. A company associated with the golf course had a debt owed to them by Long River. That went to a liquidation hearing. I attended the first hearing, and it was adjourned simply because the barrister who was acting for Long River said he'd only been appointed the night before, which I found quite astounding, but which is a typical legal attempt to try and drag proceedings out. The second liquidation proceeded, however, effectively the day before the money was paid. Now, it was paid by the American company, we believe, because it came from Connecticut, and that was for some $20,000, which, of course, in the overall scheme of things, was not a very large amount of money. But in any event, that liquidation is no longer proceeding. However, there are various other ways, and it's probably not wise publicly to go into the details yet of how that might happen, but there are other ways that we potentially can see Long River wound up. So that's the liquidation situation, and it's a question of just saying, watch this space. Now, I want to turn briefly to the issue that the council have commenced removing all the damage to the property from the fire. They are doing that at the moment at their cost, but that is another debt, and we believe it will be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars that the council will be able to claim from Long River, and that may in itself ultimately result in a liquidation application. So those are those three issues. I just want to talk briefly about another matter that's recently arisen, and that is the motorbike proposed rally on the golf course. And this is really information for KWGS members. Basically, there are various ways in which such an activity may comprise a criminal offence. Now, I'm not going to go into the details of what that is, but we have the Trespass Act, we have the Police Act, and we have the Crimes Act. And each of those make provision for criminal proceedings in the event that something like a whole crowd of bikies coming onto the land would incur. So that's what that situation is. So I think those are the key legal questions. Do we have any other legal ones that have come up during the...
No.
There was a question about the status of the application that went in November and
okay, so the resource consent application, yes. So that was the resource consent application that went in seeking to have the boundaries changed on the first 9 holes. So far as we can ascertain, that application is no longer operational. Now, it's probably just been paused, so it hasn't gone away totally. But the key issue was that the application was based on the fact that Oliver could purchase other land to allow the first 9 holes to be developed. That has fallen through. So there is no prospect now that other land, which was on the what we call the hopper land, will now be used. So that means that effectively the whole basis of that resource consent application has been scuttled.
Okay, and the status of the fast track approval process, as I mentioned earlier, our working assumption is that Oliver will be applying through that central government process, and
the issue there is that the encumbrance again plays a particularly important role in this. The encumbrance stands separate from any resource consent application, and as I understand the current draft of that fast track legislation is that it allows the government to effectively take control of the resource consent process and speed that up in such a way that the local council or local authority has no say in that to any great extent. However, because we have an encumbrance on that land, it looks to me as though that in itself could prevent the fast track application from going forward. And this is something that I don't believe that any other fast track situation is facing. That is a 990-year encumbrance. I don't believe that the legislation will provide the ability for the government or the committee of ministers to override what is a separate and outside the scope of the resource consent document.
Chris, I just wonder if you could address question number 7 on our monitor to your left there. This is to do with people who've been successful in the small claims tribunal and also staff who are owed money, but they're all owed money by one of the companies, but the company they're owed money by is not the company that has any assets. So that they say, can they also claim against Long River?
Or Fiona.
Right.
Or
So
Fiona, yes.
basically, this is the strategy again of the developer to try and ensure that all the potential liabilities are set or sit in a company that he can allow to collapse and still protect the land. So that company, as I referred to earlier, is GHCC 2016 Limited. That's the company that employed the staff. It's the company that the golf club members paid their subscriptions to and therefore have a contract with. So we've been helping the members through the process in the disputes tribunal. And in every case, we have been successful in that. So in other words, the disputes tribunal has made an order in favour of the golf club member to have their fees paid back. Now, GHCC 2016's response has been to promise that the money will be paid in the future. And this all started last year, and every date in the future that has been set, nothing has been paid. So we would have no faith that they have any intention of paying that at this point in time. There are a couple of major claims where payment was to be made by 31st of May. We think it's unlikely that they will be paid. Another interesting component of the tribunal's decisions is that some of the adjudicators, but not all of them, have also found Wayne Bailey, who is the director, the sole director of GHCC 2016 Limited, to be personally liable for those debts. So that's another avenue that we're going to be progressing. And so we're going to support in one way or another the various fee-paying members who are owed money, and we will proceed against both GHC 2016 Limited, which we believe to be trading while insolvent. Certainly the history of it would suggest that, but also against Wayne Bailey as the sole director.
Okay, so look, we have answered, I'll just check if there are any more questions. I think we've answered that one pretty well.
Oh, you asked about the staff, didn't you?
Yes, the staff as well. Chris, can you cover those?
Yeah,
too?
so the staff are in the same position as the fee-paying members, excepting that in the event of a liquidation, employees have a higher priority. So they will also have the capability of pursuing debts. My understanding is that the employment tribunal have made appropriate orders, but that to date nothing has been paid to them either. So they're in the same position, but they do have a preference because of the Employment Contracts Act.
Okay, so we just had another question come in about the fire clearance and the possible liquidation of Long River, and it reads, if the debt to the council for the fire clearance successfully liquidates Long River, does that mean that Phoenix Trust also has to be put into liquidation before a mortgage sale could happen? Can you talk about that, Chris?
Well, the short answer is it doesn't have to be put in liquidation. So once the decision by the High Court, and it is a High Court application, by the way, once a decision by the High Court has been made to liquidate Long River, that's it. So whether Phoenix ultimately goes into liquidation is a separate issue. one has to also consider the potential that that Greg Oliver himself may be made personally bankrupt. In that case, if that were to happen, then his shares in Long River become the property of the official assignee.
All right, well, I don't think we've got any more questions at this stage. And so I'd like to thank everybody for putting up with our gremlins, for tuning in the first place, and then for logging back in again after we had a technical hiccup. We will we have recorded all of this. It will be edited, and then we're going to put it up on our YouTube site, on our YouTube channel, so that you can look at it again. And so folk who weren't able to make tonight can also have a good look, and you can share it, of course, and promote it, and make sure that everybody who's interested gets to see all of our material on the YouTube channel. There's now 4 videos which are pretty informative and set out the whole case for the green space and its retention. So thanks again, everybody, for tuning in, and I wish you all a very good evening.
Thank you.